morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. It's Wednesday, July 7th, 2021. And since last week, July 1st to be exact, there have been a bunch of state-level bills that have gone into effect as law that help advance liberty in practice and effect, and a few others that were signed into law over the last week that'll be going into effect later this summer. Now, I've done a bunch of episodes recently covering state-level resistance to federal violations of the Second Amendment or the unconstitutional federal war on drugs. So on this episode, I want to focus on a number of other issues, more niche areas where we're seeing small but important steps forward for liberty brick by brick, person by person, issue by issue. We're setting the foundation to advance the Constitution and liberty on a state and local level. So I've got highlights from 10 or so of these, maybe a dozen, somewhere around there. We're talking about facial recognition surveillance, healthcare without some government regulation under the direct primary care model, police state issues like qualified immunity, even a local one on no-knock warrants. Permitless carry is a big one, but it's generally not seen as something that's addressing federal attacks on the Second Amendment. Sound money and even raw milk, health freedom, food freedom, for example. But first of all, before getting to all that, my name is Michael Bolden. We're broadcasting live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage has everything you need to follow this program, all the archives, individual episodes like this. I'm going to link to all the reports that I'm talking about. I'm just barely going to scratch the surface on each of the states and issues that I'm covering. So that way you can go to the links and read and learn more in context on your own time and share the stuff widely. Because the more we get that information out there, the more that people will rally to the cause and we can do more each year going into the future. You can also find all the platforms we're on. We live stream on the mainstream ones, and in case we're gone someday, which is very likely to happen at some point they're going to say, well, this 10-year-old video or production is a violation, and so therefore you're gone. That's what happened to my buddy Robert Scott Bell. He got 2 copyright strikes, or he got 2 warnings on health issues, and then as soon as they reinstated him after his pause, his temporary ban, the very next day he got a 3rd strike that said, well, this 10-year-old video or an 8-year-old video violates something. So I think they just had it in for him in that situation. It really felt like it. So you can find all those platforms. We're on a bunch of other niche platforms or smaller platforms. We're like on Gab and MeWe and Minds and Brighteon and BitChute and Odyssey and Library.tv. And then the audio-only podcast edition, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the rest. And of course, you can also find our membership program where I am extremely grateful for all the support people have been giving us. It starts out as little as $2 a month, and we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. Again, that show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty, all spelled out. 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat while we're allowing people another moment or so to get notifications to join us on the live stream. And the first thing I noticed popped up on my chat app here is a comment from the Chicken Man on YouTube. This is awesome. I want to buy raw milk with sound money while permitlessly carrying. That's the best comment of the month so far. Anyways, hello to Liberty Revolutionary, Anil, and Missouri Liberty Alliance, Tim Martin, Dixie Strong, Doodly Doo, Erwin Havernick, Patricia Dance, Clay, there's Tavish, Jake Harstern, I'm an authoritarian for liberty. That's awesome. Jim Kirkendall, Joe, there's Erwin again, Senator DT in Elkhart, Indiana, Jake Volker in Houston. There's Neil again and everyone else. I appreciate Tavish in Lee's Summit, Missouri. There's a Missouri contingent in the house. Good to see you guys. You're doing great work in support of liberty there in Missouri. We need a lot more, but I appreciate everyone being here. I'll take a look at the chat a little bit later, but let's get right to it. And I want to start out, and I'm just going to cover some brief issues, give you some highlights. I will leave links in the show notes, and then you can go read and share, and we can build on this. Because remember, and I'm going to mention it at the end, our motto here at 10th Amendment Center, which you can find, quick advertisement, on our annual membership cards, is a Latin phrase from the penman of the Revolution, John Dickinson. The phrase is Concordia res parve crescunt. It means small things grow great by concord. So every small step forward for liberty can attract others to the movement. So let's start out on facial recognition surveillance. And in Virginia, I'll pull this up on the screen, in Virginia of all places, just last week, a new law went into effect that places what they call a moratorium on law enforcement's use of facial recognition and prohibits the purchase or deployment of facial recognition technology unless it is expressly authorized by statute. In other words, this is a complete and total ban. They're just hinting that at some point they want to actually change that in the future. But they had to, under some pressure from the public, they had to ban this stuff. So it's a complete and total ban. Not only can they just not use it, so if they already have it and they have been using it, we know some law enforcement has been using it around Virginia in recent years, they can have to stop using it. They also have to stop buying any. They can't buy any new. And then on top of it, it bans, so this is how Mike Meharry explains it. He said, in effect, the law bans police use of facial recognition until the state legislature passes another law in the future governing its use. And I think that's what they're going to probably do. And in fact, a lot of times it's what we see on surveillance bans. For example, we'll say it's just temporary because there's a disparity on racial issues. Well, we don't want them to be good at this on anybody. And certainly facial recognition, and I've talked about this on the show previously, facial recognition does a really bad job on people of color. They misidentify people like 30-40% more than someone like myself, a middle-aged white male. So of course that's a bad outcome of it. But we don't want it to be good on them. We don't want it to be good on these other people or those people. It doesn't matter. We don't want this warrantless mass surveillance tool to be good on anybody. So now that we have a foot in the door, small things can grow great by concord. People may realize that the world doesn't end and they can continue putting the pressure on to say, no, you don't ever need to reinstate this. So it's a complete ban that went into effect in Virginia on July 1st. In Maine, something similar just went into law without the governor's signature. It was passed by huge margins. The governor decided not to sign it for some reason, but it actually became law on July 1st and goes into effect on the 1st of October. And here from Meharry's report, the new law bans public employees and officials, including law enforcement officers, from obtaining, retaining, possessing, accessing, or using a facial surveillance system or information derived from a facial surveillance system, with some exceptions. I'm going to say, based on my reading of the law, it's probably going to shut down about 75% of usage. And I would say from 0 stoppage to 75 is a huge step forward for Maine. It also bans state agencies, Mike reports, from entering into agreements with third parties to obtain facial recognition information, because we know all this stuff goes through when the locals collect the surveillance data, whether it's facial recognition or Stingray cell phone surveillance or cell site simulators or drones or whatever it may be, biometric iris scans, any of that stuff. What happens is it gets dumped into fusion centers or ISE, information sharing environment, which is a post 9/11 Patriot Act kind of successor to do all kinds of information sharing. And then it goes up to the FBI, the next gen facial recognition database, and then they all share it. So even if they aren't collecting it on a state or a local level, they may still want to do an end run around that and collect it from other cities through the FBI. And here they say they're also banned from obtaining it from third parties. That's LD 1585 in Maine. Moving forward, we're talking about healthcare freedom. We were always promised that the so-called Affordable Care Act was going to make things more affordable, but that was always a lie. We knew that right from the beginning, but a lot of other people did not. And here in South Dakota, again on July 1st, a new law went into effect, and Mike Meharry reports that it will help facilitate healthcare freedom outside of government insurance regulatory schemes. Here's how it goes. The legislation specifies that direct primary care agreements, sometimes called medical retainer agreements, do not constitute insurance. These are basically like a video subscription plan, but for healthcare. You sign up here in Southern California where we have these as well. I'm not signed up for one, but they're generally around $100 to $150 a month. I've seen in other states, I know Meharry had one when he was in Kentucky. I think it was like $60 or $70 a month, and it covers all your basic day-to-day or general care, not specialists, General care, you pay that monthly fee and you just go in and out. You just use as much as you need. And he says in South Dakota, where they have the direct primary care model, the concern was you couldn't do this in a cost-effective way because they saw it as an insurance plan, and therefore the high regulatory burden came in, made it more expensive, made it impossible. So once they say a direct primary care model is not insurance, it thereby, Mike writes, frees doctors from the onerous requirements and regulations under the state insurance code. The law stipulates that a primary care provider or agent of a healthcare provider is not required to obtain a certificate of authority or license under this act to market, sell, or offer to sell a direct primary care agreement. And Michigan Capital Confidential covered this a number of years ago. They say that by removing a third-party payer from the equation, medical retainer agreements help both physicians and patients minimize costs. Under these agreements, they write, this is Jack Spencer at Michigan Capital Confidential. Patients make monthly payments to a physician who in return agrees to provide a menu of routine services at no extra charge. Because no insurance company stands between patient and doctor, this is free market stuff happening right before our very eyes. Because no insurance company stands between patient and doctor, the hassles and expense of bureaucratic red tape are eliminated, which have resulted in dramatic cost reductions. I know my buddy Tom Woods, who actually interviewed me just last week at tomwoods.com, episode 1927. That was a really fun episode if you want to check that one out. But he's done a guy named Josh Umber, I believe, Josh Umber in Kansas, and I think he's also covered the Oklahoma Surgery Center. These are two places where they've put this type of model into practice, where they're just doing it outside the insurance regulatory system, and they can provide lower cost, better care because they're not distracted by government red tape. So in South Dakota, that went into effect on July 1st. And on July 4th, a similar law that was passed back in 2017 in West Virginia was expanded. So in 2017, West Virginia passed almost the same direct primary care model. And then this year on July 4th, House Bill 2877, which passed unanimously in both the House and the Senate. I'm just fascinated that there isn't some authoritarian out there when these things have been moving forward saying, what, they're going to provide services and we're not going to be able to have as much regulatory control? No, it's just wild to me that this has been happening from left and right. This one passed 98-0 in the House and 34-0 in the Senate in West Virginia. It expands direct health care agreements beyond primary care to include all medical care services. So this is a great example of how once you put your foot in the door for liberty, if you keep pushing, if you just say that's it, then that's going to be the end of the day. And you haven't really created a free society. But if you get your foot in the door and you show people that this is a good thing, the world doesn't come to an end, then you have to work for more. You have to stay consistent. You always have to have your eye on the long-term prize. This expands the direct primary care to all medical care services. So, for example, it now defines medical care services as a screen, assessment, diagnosis, or treatment for the purpose or promotion of health or the detection and management of disease or injury within the competency of, and training of a medical care provider. It basically really broadens this to specialists. You can have a single monthly payment that isn't held down by the regulatory system as much. There's still regulation, but it won't be nearly as much. And Meharry writes it this way: the enactment of this law opens the door for specialists, chiropractors, and other healthcare providers to open practices based on the direct primary care model implemented in 2017 in West Virginia. So that's the direct primary care issue happening in South Dakota and West Virginia, both in effect as of this month. Now we can move forward to some police state issues. In New Mexico, House Bill 4 went into effect to create a state process to do an end run around the Supreme Court judicial fiction that is known as qualified immunity. This is something that was created out of thin air by the Supreme Court. Really, you can go back to the 60s, but primarily in the 80s, and built upon, and then through the incorporation doctrine forced on all 50 states. So anytime you run into it, it's not just police. Qualified immunity deals with basically every person working for the government. So if the government people violate your rights, and that's not an if, it happens constantly, and you actually have a case where you can think even under the current system, you can sue them in court, they make it almost impossible to do. I'm not going to explain that right now. I've done a bunch of other episodes on that, and you can actually read a little bit about that and get some links in this report on New Mexico. But basically what they all do is they end up suing in federal court because everything is a federal case. But the federal courts are not friendly to liberty. The state courts aren't either. But there is almost no chance of being able to successfully sue a government official for violating your rights, which is how it should be. Because if you can't hold them accountable, you don't live in a free society. They are in charge, not the people of the several states. So anyways, here in New Mexico, this went into effect on July 1st as well. Basically, all of these are July 1st-ish. The law creates a cause of action in state courts to sue state or local government agencies when their employees or officials subject or cause to be subjected any resident of New Mexico or person within the state to deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured pursuant to the Bill of Rights of the Constitution of New Mexico. This is decentralizing. They're focusing people's their eye on the prize is now on the state constitution, not thinking that the federal government is going to come in and save them, because the federal government has caused almost all the problems we face today in the first place. Even the ones on a state level where the state actors are bad, they're doing bad stuff because the federal government either funds them, they direct them, they partner with them, or the federal courts protect them through things like qualified immunity. HB 4, in effect now in New Mexico, specifically excludes qualified immunity as a defense in such cases. The problem that I have with this new law in New Mexico, it is not a cure-all. The problem is that they don't allow you to sue the individual. You're still suing the local agency. So there's a step forward to actually now saying, well, at least the lawsuits aren't going to be on a federal level because they can't be trusted. At least there's now a chance to be able to successfully sue and protect your rights in a state court. I'm not really a sue type of person because I don't think it's a great strategy, but there are many people who are, and this is going to be a better path forward, is to focus on a state level. Now they're going to need to move forward and allow, under state law, individuals to be held accountable for their actions. Another one on police state issues, Lexington, Kentucky just passed a ban on no-knock warrants. Like, the idea that there can be a warrant without a knock, without even announcing one's presence, is just totally antithetical to the entire history of American liberty. But the new law that went into effect, this is in late June actually, bans the use of no-knock warrants and creates a set of standards police must follow when exercising search or arrest warrants. Meharry again writes, law enforcement officers serving warrants in the city are now required to knock on the door and clearly and loudly announce their presence, waiting at least 15 seconds before entering premises. Now, the standard really should be higher than that. They got it as low as they could in order to get it passed. They needed 10 votes to be a veto proof because the mayor actually was against it. The law enforcement lobby groups lobbied aggressively against this. We know through studies of this, they always tell us that this is going to be used for terrorism or rapists or whatever, really, really bad criminals, murderers. But in almost every situation, no-knock warrants by a vast majority are used for the war on drugs or gun control, for example. So they also must wear body cameras during the execution of a warrant. I have issues with police body cams. I see them as surveillance tools, and they don't like releasing the footage, so I don't know how much that'll help. But that passed by 10-5 vote, and it is an ordinance, not a resolution, so it is legally binding. Now, immediately after that passed, and Meharry, if you followed his efforts when he lived in Lexington, Kentucky some years ago to expose some illegal, unconstitutional, warrantless surveillance programs, law enforcement sued him personally, even though they released documents to him. They wanted him to not be able to share that stuff publicly. And now they are suing to overturn this ban on no-knock warrants. Law enforcement is not your friend. They want to enforce law. And when you live under the largest government in the history of the world, most law shouldn't exist. So enforcing law is not a positive thing, as we've been told. Now, moving forward to permitless carry, some people like to call it constitutional carry. I don't like the term, but we do use it because that's generally how people understand this thing. Your rights do not come from the Constitution. The Second Amendment is not your gun permit. You are. You, by your birthright, by the nature of being human, have a natural right to keep and bear arms, to defend yourself, your home, your property, your country, your state, your community. It's not there because of words on paper. But anyways, we want to see states remove requirements to have a permission slip, because if you have to have a permission slip, you're really talking about a privilege like driving, and not really a natural right as it should be. So here in Iowa, just went into effect, a new law eliminates the permit requirement for buying or carrying handguns in the state. It also loosens some restrictions on the possession and transfer of firearms. It passed the Senate by 31-17 and the House by a vote of 60-37. Not as wide of a margin as it should have been, but it was signed by Governor Reynolds on April 2nd and went into effect on July 1st. And here's how Meharry talks about how this kind of builds an environment that advances liberty, and also, even though it's just a state and local issue, it can actually affect the ability of the federal government to implement their own control programs. And here's how Mike puts it. While permitless carry bills do not directly affect federal gun control, the widespread passage of permitless concealed carry or permitless open carry, whatever, permitless carry laws in states subtly undermines federal efforts to regulate guns. As we've seen with marijuana and industrial hemp, for example, a federal regulation becomes ineffective when states ignore it and pass laws encouraging the prohibited activity anyway. So we know that when you have a culture of self-defense, of individual right to keep and bear arms, it is going to be much harder when people learn that this actually creates a better society rather than a worse one. It'll be much harder for a far-off central government to enforce their will on all of the states. So we want to encourage this advanced liberty as much as possible. Iowa now in effect. And in Wyoming, this is another example, like in West Virginia, of how they've already done something like this, and now they've looked at it and said, this isn't enough. And in fact, almost every time something like this passes, it really isn't enough. But it is up to the people of each state to say, it isn't enough, and we need to move it forward. So that's really, it's a combination of relentless long-term vision activism and education to understand that liberty always needs to grasp for more, because power, as Abigail Adams told us many years ago, and so many others, power is ever grasping. It always seeks to grow. Samuel Adams told us that power is intoxicating. So here in Wyoming, another law went into effect, House Bill 116. They had a permitless carry. So under the old law, Wyoming residents could carry a concealed firearm without a permit. HB 116, which just went into effect this month, expands this permitless carry by removing the residency requirement and allowing any person legally allowed under state law to possess a firearm to carry it concealed in the state. So you could come in from any state and have permitless carry in Wyoming. It's not just for Wyoming residents. Wyoming is basically saying, we're welcoming gun owners here. Now, it's very unfortunate that the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which we saw recently pass in Missouri, almost the same bill in Wyoming, which got out of committee, was opposed by all 23 sheriffs in the state. They wanted to continue participating in the federal gun control enforcement schemes because they love the war on drugs and asset forfeiture and surveillance and all that other garbage. But it is positive to see at least, you go for as many things as you can, and sometimes you're throwing darts, sometimes you're really focused, sometimes you want to hit them from a bunch of different directions, and then you get as many through as you can. And the people who are focusing on permitless carry are doing a great, great job. I know Wyoming gun owners, Anthony Bouchard, and a bunch of other people are doing really good work on the right to keep and bear arms in Wyoming. So they already passed this permitless carry. They expanded by removing a residency requirement. So anybody can come from anywhere in the country and go to Wyoming. The passage, Mike Meharry points out, of HB 116 underscores an important strategic point. Sometimes activists, he's being nice. Mike is such a professional. I am not as professional as Mike is. Almost every issue we ever work on, Anytime we get something that moves forward for the Constitution and liberty, there's a whole section of people, keyboard warriors out there, say that's worthless. I mean, they're not actually doing any activism. They're just saying that they have a goal in their head and they want to post on Twitter about what their goal is and how everything that doesn't hit their goal is stupid and a waste of time and status garbage. So we get opposition from friendly fire all the time. It's because people don't recognize that you don't turn around from the largest government in the history of the world into a land of liberty in one fell swoop. You have to take step by step and move things forward. And I'll get to some founders' quotes on that in a moment. Of course, Thomas Jefferson and again, John Dickinson. But Mike points out, sometimes activists will oppose small steps forward, such as permitless carry with residency requirements, arguing that they don't go far enough. They're correct that they don't go far enough. But if you oppose them, then you're still at the same place. Now, if you support them and say that's all you're going to do, you're still in a better place than the people who are opposing these advances for liberty. So now, once you get the foot in the door, you have to start working to kick that door wide open. And Mike says, as states tear down some barriers, markets develop, and demand grows. And I would argue that people learn. We've seen this on cannabis for sure. 10, 15 years ago, if I were talking to a right-wing group about marijuana decriminalization or legalization here in California or anywhere else, I'd be hit with groans, trying to throw me out, and they would eventually listen and understand where I was getting at. But you don't see that as much anymore. There was always opposition from the right. Now places like Oklahoma and Utah and West Virginia and other places that you wouldn't necessarily expect to see this happen, they're recognizing that the world didn't come to an end. The terrorists didn't destroy America because people were growing a plant in California. And they're like, well, some people are benefiting health-wise. Other people just like it. Some people are getting rich. Why don't we do that here? In Oklahoma, they passed in 2018 the broadest medical marijuana law on a ballot in history. Most states, what they do is they say, when they pass this, or what they've normally done is they say, you can do this, doctors can recommend cannabis for this list of issues. And in Oklahoma, they said, well, why would we want to restrict what doctors do? They passed on the ballot measure that it isn't up to the state to make that determination. That's an agreement between a doctor and their patient, and it's up to the doctor completely what they're going to recommend this for. But the only reason we're able to get to that is because of the 10 to 15, 20 years of activism that has happened elsewhere, and people learn by example that the world didn't come to an end. I would like to see the same thing replicated on the right to keep and bear arms, and I think permitless carry is a great way forward for that. Now, sometimes it does have some restrictions. I know there was one that was passed in Tennessee that went into effect, that the Tennessee Firearms Alliance, TFA, I forget the actual name of the organization, but these guys are really hardcore on the right to keep and bear arms, and they're not fans of the new Tennessee carry law. I don't know if they're opposing it completely because they're not getting everything in one fell swoop, but I would actually disagree with that approach. Anyways, Mike says, once the demand grows, that creates pressure to further relax the state law. Passing bills that take a step forward sets the stage, even if they aren't perfect. Opening the door clears the way for additional steps. You can't take the second step before you take the first. And of course, for those who know what I talk about regularly, you know I'm going to go to Thomas Jefferson, writing to his friend, the Reverend Charles Clay, in January of 1790. And here's how Jefferson put it. The ground of liberty is to be gained by inches, that we must be contented to secure what we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. So you have to take everything. You have to grasp and push and just grab for every piece of liberty that you can get to move forward, but eternally press forward for what is yet to get. He didn't say push forward until you accomplish some goal. He said eternally press forward. So we're setting the foundation brick by brick, person by person, city by city, state by state, for the Constitution and liberty, and other people in the future are going to have to take that torch and run with it eternally. And Jefferson continues, he says, it takes time to persuade men to do even what is for their own good. And that is a timeless one right there. I've got a couple more here that I want to cover, and then we can wrap it up. Next up is, I actually wanted to cover Arkansas next. Let me move this around. In Arkansas, they took a small step towards treating gold and silver as money. Senate Bill 336 just went into effect again on July 1st. The law exempts coins, currency, and bullion from the state sales and use tax. This includes bars, ingots, or coins made from gold, silver, platinum, palladium that are sold based on the value of the metal. So we know Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payment of debts. None of the states have been following this for a long, long time. So they're also taxing it. They're treating money, gold and silver, they treat money as a commodity, as an investment, and then they tax it. So the great example is this. He says, imagine if you ask a grocery clerk to break a $5 bill and he charged you a 35-cent tax, not a service fee, but a tax that went to the government. If you just exchanged one form of money for another, they're taxing you on that exchange. That's what they do with gold and silver. So removing those taxes removes one small barrier to its use in everyday transactions. We can do the same thing with crypto. We can do it with anything that isn't the fiat funny money that they print out of thin air, monetize the debt that is called the fiat dollar, the US dollar. Here's J.P. Cortez testifying in committee on a similar bill that passed into law in Wyoming back in 2018. He says charging taxes on money itself is beyond the pale. Here's how J.P. put it. In effect, states that collect taxes on purchases of precious metals are inherently saying that gold and silver are not money at all. So by removing that taxes, we're basically removing the sales tax. And of course, they have to remove a capital gains tax as well at some point. That is saying that gold is now closer to what it should be, which is money. That's Arkansas, Senate Bill 336. Now, moving forward to raw milk. I can walk down the street here in Southern California in Los Angeles and go to my local market, pick up a jug of raw milk. I know in all kinds of other states, Wisconsin, for example, America's Dairyland, where I grew up, this is illegal. It's literally illegal to buy milk from a cow that's gone through a corporate run pasteurizing system. Now, you may think that it has to do that, but government is taking away your choice, and that is a problem. And it sets the foundation for government to take away your choice on other things as well. And we shouldn't be surprised when we find them taking away our choices on everything. And anytime someone has a freedom to choose one thing or another, they're lambasted, kicked off their ability to speak. They're told that they're bad and the whole world is out to get them. We shouldn't be surprised that each small step against liberty leads to many more as well. Now, in Vermont, a small second step forward to advance raw milk went into effect on July 1st, House Bill 218. Meharry writes, the legislation expands current raw milk sales by amending the current law to allow for sale by farm stands and community-supported agricultural organizations. These are CSAs. It builds on the expansion of raw milk sales that passed in 2019. So they originally, before 2019, they only allowed raw milk sales directly to the consumer if they were on the farm. So you literally had, now maybe that's easy to do in Vermont. It's not easy to do in Southern California. So if you had to go to a farm, you might be stuck in traffic for 2-3 hours total to do this. It would make it almost impossible. It would be equivalent of a total ban. So they started out by saying, if you go directly to the farmer, you can purchase this. Then in 2019, they expanded that to allow delivery. So you can order it in advance, they pay for it in advance, and then they deliver to your home. That's an improvement. Now they're allowing sale at farm stands. These like roadside, if you see, at least we see them here, like strawberries and things like that. You can also sell raw milk at a farm stand or a CSA. Now, keep in mind, the federal government claims the ability to totally ban raw milk, not just in interstate, crossing state borders, but within the boundaries of a state. Here's how, let me set the foundation here. In 1987, the feds implemented 21 CFR 1240.61a, providing that, quote, no person shall cause to be delivered into interstate commerce or shall sell, otherwise distribute or hold for sale or other distribution after shipment, blah, 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 any milk or milk product in final package form for human consumption unless the product has been pasteurized. So the federal government says it is illegal to take and bring into commerce anyway raw milk across state lines, period. But Mike writes that not only do the feds ban the transportation of raw milk across state lines, they also claim the authority to ban unpasteurized milk within the borders of the state. And here's how they put it. The FDA says it is within HHS's authority, Health and Human Services Authority, to institute an intrastate ban on unpasteurized milk as well. So basically, if you can get all 50 states to say this is legal, we're going to allow it, people can actually have this product, and the feds actually want to implement that intrastate ban, it's basically going to be almost impossible. The same thing is happening, of course, again, on cannabis, hemp. Now we're starting to see some movement on the right to keep and bear arms as well. So Vermont takes a second step forward. And then also, just a few days ago, it was signed on July 2nd in Alaska, House Bill 22, the very first step on raw milk. It legalizes raw milk through contracts, part of granting part ownership of livestock, commonly known as herd shares. Currently in Alaska, of all places, it's illegal to buy milk unless it's pasteurized. So now they're saying you can get a group of people and you can own a cow together, and then now you can participate in this and have it. So this is a very, very small step forward. But again, just like we were told by Thomas Jefferson, the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are a bunch of issues, a bunch of other steps forward taken in the states on the right to keep and bear arms, the Second Amendment. I've covered that in a bunch of other episodes. I also did one recently covering the war on drugs. There were a significant number of bills where expanded current programs and new things that went into effect recently. I covered some of that in an episode on June 29th, The War on Drugs, Unconstitutional Since Day One. And I want to wrap it up with this. I know I've been going a little bit longer than normal today. Again, a reminder from John Dickinson, writing in 1767 in his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania against the hated Townshend Acts of that year. This is where he earned the name the penman of the Revolution. He signed off his first letter. He's talking about if they can shut down one colony, if they can deprive New York of her rights, they can deprive anybody of their rights as well in other colonies. You can't just sit idly by. And he signed it off with this phrase, Concordia res parve crescunt, which means small things grow great by concord. We hold that very dearly. We follow that approach on everything that we do. Of course, we want the big wins. Those are exciting, but those are very, very difficult. And if we hold out for the big win, sometimes we never get anything. So we have to work for the small ones in the meantime and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. Again, I hope you found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I will link to all these reports. There's a bunch of them in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. If you support the show and you like it, make sure to smash that like button, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, any other podcast platform. That helps us spread the word by triggering algorithms and telling the platforms to show the program to more people. Our membership program is 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Please don't feel any obligation to join us, but if you do have the financial means, it starts out as little as $2 a month, and I'd be extremely grateful for your support. I'll take a look over at the live chat and the comments in the archive a little bit later today. I read through all of them. I don't have a chance to reply to many, but I do when I can, and I appreciate your feedback. You can also email me over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Here's Jimmy Hoffa. What a great screen name. Whenever standing armies are kept up, and when the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty is, if not already annihilated, if not already gone, is close to being annihilated. That's kind of a paraphrase. This is from St. George Tucker, the great legal jurist of the late 18th and early 19th century, the great legal mind. He wrote A View of the Constitution of the United States in 1803. Basically, this combination of standing armies and restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms means that liberty is on the verge of being extinct. Great quote. I will read through more a little bit later today. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.